The harsh Arizona Territory of 1873 showed no mercy to those unprepared for its brutality. Sarah Whitley never imagined she'd face it alone after burying her husband beneath the merciless sun. With dwindling supplies and no knowledge of the land, death seemed certain until a shadow fell across her makeshift camp. Standing before her was Nahkohe, an Apache warrior whose imposing height and strength terrified and fascinated her. Against all tribal wisdom, he offered protection through lands where no white woman had survived alone. Their journey began in silence and suspicion, neither able to fully understand the other's words. Yet something deeper than language began to form between them. Could a woman who lost everything find love with a man from a world so different from her own? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Whitley had never imagined ending up alone in this unforgiving wilderness. The silver locket around her neck, containing a daguerreotype of Thomas, felt heavier with each passing day. She often found herself absent-mindedly touching it, a habit that had formed in the 3 weeks since she'd buried him. Boston seemed a lifetime away now. As the daughter of merchant Harold Preston, Sarah had grown up surrounded by fine things and proper society. Her father's import business had provided a comfortable life, one where she learned to appreciate fine china, read literature, and play the pianoforte, skills utterly useless in this savage landscape. She had met Thomas Whitley at a spring social in 1871. Unlike the other gentlemen who seemed interested only in her father's connections, Thomas spoke passionately about the Western Territories. His eyes lit up, describing opportunities awaiting those brave enough to claim them. Though her parents had reservations about Thomas's modest means as a schoolteacher, they couldn't deny the way Sarah blossomed in his company. "The West is the future, Sarah," he would say, spreading maps across her father's table. "Land for the taking, where a man can build something meaningful." Their wedding had been modest but joyful. The journey west began immediately after, a decision that horrified her mother. "You'll return within a year," her mother had predicted, embracing Sarah for what would be the final time. No proper lady can endure such conditions. The wagon train journey proved more arduous than either had anticipated. Dust coated everything. Water became precious. Privacy was non-existent. Yet somehow, in those difficult conditions, their bond strengthened. Thomas's tuberculosis, however, worsened with each passing mile. They had stopped at Willow Creek Outpost to allow Thomas to recover. The small settlement, little more than a trading post, saloon, and scattered homesteads, was meant to be temporary. Sarah nursed Thomas through increasingly frequent coughing fits, watching helplessly as he grew thinner, his once robust voice becoming a whisper. Thomas's fever took him swiftly in the end. Sarah had held his hand as life departed, his final words barely audible. "Continue west, my love, our dream." She had buried him behind their rented cabin, marking the grave with a wooden cross she'd carved herself. For days afterward, she barely left her bed, surrounded by Thomas's possessions. Most precious among them, his journal detailing their planned route to California. 2 weeks of grieving passed before Sarah made her decision. Despite warnings from the outpost's inhabitants about traveling alone, she packed their remaining supplies into their wagon. Thomas's dream would not die with him. "Mrs. Whitley, this is madness," the trading post owner had insisted. "Wait for the next wagon train, at least." "That could be months," she'd replied, securing the last of her provisions. "I have Thomas's maps and journal. I know the way." What she hadn't accounted for was the treacherous creek crossing 3 days out from the outpost. The wagon will caught on a submerged rock, cracking the axle. As water rushed in, Sarah barely managed to grab Thomas's journal and a few provisions before the current took the wagon. She had salvaged what she could, making camp on elevated ground. For 2 days, she'd rationed her meager supplies, trying to determine her next move. The territory surrounding her was marked as Apache lands on Thomas's maps, a designation he had planned to circumvent by heading south before continuing west. That night, as she huddled near her small fire, Sarah felt eyes watching her from the darkness. Clutching Thomas's hunting knife, the only weapon she'd managed to save. She peered into the shadows, certain that death approached. She had no way of knowing that the figure observing her from the darkness would change her life forever. Sarah fingered the locket again, opening it to look at Thomas's face. "I tried," she whispered to the image. "I truly tried to fulfill your dream." She closed the locket and wiped a single tear. The wilderness had won. Without her wagon, without proper supplies, she would not survive much longer. As darkness fell completely, Sarah added the last of her wood to the fire, knowing it might be her final night alive. It was then that she first heard the footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal. Someone was approaching her camp. Nahkohe moved silently through the shadows, his massive frame somehow avoiding every twig and dry leaf. For 3 days he had watched the white woman struggling to survive. His people called the whites Inda, and most Apache warriors would have either killed her or left her to the mercy of the desert. Yet something about her determination had kept him observing. The small leather medicine pouch hanging from his neck seemed to grow warm against his skin, a sign his grandfather had taught him to recognize as the spirits offering guidance. Inside the pouch rested sacred items: a hawk feather, a smooth river stone from his childhood vision quest, and dried herbs bound with sinew. Nahkohe touched it briefly, seeking wisdom. Among the Ndi, what the whites called Apache, Nahkohe had always been different. Standing nearly a head taller than other warriors, his unusual height had marked him from birth. As a boy, the other children had called him Idea God, Long Shadow, sometimes in awe, sometimes in mockery. "You carry the blood of ancient giants," his grandfather had told him. "Your size is a gift from the ancestors. It will make you strong, but it will also make you walk a different path." That different path had led him to become one of the tribe's most capable warriors, yet never fully part of the close brotherhood. Other men respected his hunting prowess and fighting skills but viewed his quiet, thoughtful nature with suspicion. While they boasted around evening fires, Nahkohe listened to the night sounds and watched the stars. Now, as he approached the white woman's camp, Nahkohe recalled the elder's warning that morning. "The Inda bring nothing but death," old Taza had said when Nahkohe mentioned the stranded woman. "Their metal road grows closer each season. Their soldiers kill our people. Leave this woman to the desert." Defying an elder was not done lightly. Yet Nahkohe had seen something in the woman's stubborn struggle that resonated with his own experience of standing apart. She did not wail and surrender to her fate as other lost whites had done. Instead, she rationed her supplies with discipline and attempted to repair her situation with the limited tools at hand. Drawing closer to her firelight, Nahkohe made a decision that would change the course of his life. He would reveal himself and offer assistance. If she reacted with the fear and hatred most whites showed his people, he would simply disappear back into the darkness. But if not, he stepped deliberately on a dry branch, causing a sharp crack to announce his presence. No warrior would accidentally make such noise. It was his way of giving her warning. The woman spun toward the sound, clutching a small knife that would be useless against any real threat. Her eyes widened as Nahkohe's imposing figure emerged from the shadows. Terror flashed across her face, yet she did not scream or run as he had expected. Instead, she raised her chin slightly and tightened her grip on the knife. Nahkohe raised his empty hands slowly, palms forward, a universal signal of peace. He had learned a few words of the white man's tongue from traders and captives over the years. "No hurt," he said in halting English, keeping his deep voice soft. "You alone. Not safe." The woman's knuckles whitened around the knife handle, but her voice came steadier than he expected. "Are you going to kill me?" Nahkohe shook his head slowly. "No kill. Help." Disbelief crossed her face. Nahkohe understood her suspicion. His people and hers had been enemies since the whites first entered these lands. Trust between them was as unlikely as water flowing uphill. He gestured to her meager supplies, then to the vast desert around them. "You die here, alone." The truth of his words visibly impacted her. Her shoulders sagged slightly, though the knife remained pointed at him. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Nahkohe touched his medicine pouch. How could he explain that the spirits had drawn him to her? That sometimes paths crossed for reasons beyond understanding? With his limited English, he could only offer the simplest answer. Spirits say. He pointed west. I take. Safe place. The woman glanced at her few possessions, then back to Nahkohe's face, studying him intently. In her eyes, he saw fear battling with the recognition of her desperate situation. After a long moment, she lowered the knife slightly. My name is Sarah. Nahkohe, he responded, touching his chest. It was not acceptance yet, but it was a beginning. Dawn broke over the desert with unforgiving brightness. Sarah stood beside the broken wagon wheel, the last remnant of her previous life, as Nahkohe silently assessed her possessions. She had slept little, keeping the small fire between them all night, her hand never far from Thomas's knife. Take, Nahkohe said, pointing to her blanket, the remaining food and Thomas's journal. He held up 4 fingers, then pointed to the water canteen. For days. Need more. Sarah nodded, understanding the critical importance of water in this harsh land. She watched as Nahkohe examined the broken wheel, running his large hand along the cracked wood. No fix, he concluded, standing to his full height. Sarah had never seen a man so tall, certainly not among the Apache she had glimpsed from the safety of settlements. His broad shoulders and powerful build made her feel small and vulnerable, yet his actions thus far had been gentle and considerate, keeping a respectful distance that surprised her. Which way? She asked, gesturing around them. Nahkohe pointed west. 3 days. Water. Then he pointed southwest. 5 days. White people. The choice seemed clear to Sarah. Water first, then civilization. She nodded toward the west, and Nahkohe gave a brief nod of approval. Gathering her few possessions into a bundle, Sarah cast one final glance at the wagon wheel. Thomas had been so proud of their wagon, carefully chosen for their new life. Now it lay broken, much like the future they had planned. Nahkohe noticed her hesitation. We go, he said softly, then added a word in his own language that Sarah didn't understand. Their first day of travel established the pattern that would carry them forward. Nahkohe set a pace that Sarah could maintain, though she struggled over the rough terrain. When she stumbled on loose rocks, he didn't offer to help, something she found both frustrating and oddly respectful. He was allowing her to find her own strength. By midday, the sun was merciless. Sarah's bonnet offered minimal protection, and her heavy skirts, practical for Boston society but ridiculous in this environment, caught on every bush and cactus. Sweat trickled down her back, and her throat felt like sandpaper despite carefully rationing her water. Rest, Nahkohe announced, pointing to the meager shade of a scrubby mesquite tree. Sarah sank gratefully to the ground, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Nahkohe squatted nearby, seemingly untouched by the heat or exertion. From a small pouch at his waist, he withdrew what looked like dried meat, offering a piece to Sarah. Eat, he said. Strong. Sarah hesitated, then accepted the jerky. It was tough and gamey, nothing like the food she was accustomed to, but her hunger overcame her hesitation. They ate in silence, the vast landscape stretching around them. Thank you, Sarah said when she finished. It felt inadequate for the aid he was providing, yet what more could she say? Why this imposing warrior had chosen to help her remained a mystery. Nahkohe tilted his head, studying her with dark, inscrutable eyes. Then he reached for a stick and began drawing in the dirt. Sarah leaned forward, curious. He sketched a simple map, indicating their position, then the water source they sought, and finally, a cluster of squares that she assumed represented the white settlement. Your people, he said, pointing to the squares. Then he hesitated, searching for words. Why alone? It was the first personal question he had asked. Sarah touched her locket instinctively. My husband, she began, unsure how to explain with the language barrier between them. She pointed to the locket, opening it to show Thomas's image. He died. Sickness. She mimicked coughing. Understanding dawned in Nahkohe's eyes. Your man. To spirit world. Sarah nodded, tears threatening. Yes, I was trying to reach California. His dream. Nahkohe seemed to consider this, his expression thoughtful. After a moment he drew another symbol on his dirt map, a mountain range to the far west. Big water, he said. California. He pronounced it carefully, separating the syllables. Sarah felt a surge of emotion at this simple acknowledgement of her destination, of Thomas's dream. Yes, she whispered. That's where I was going. As they resumed their journey that afternoon, something subtle had shifted between them. The silence no longer felt tense but companionable. When they reached a steep ravine, Nahkohe stopped, considering the obstacle. Without a word, he extended his hand to help her across. Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting it. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip gentle despite his obvious strength. It was a small gesture, yet as the sun began to set on their first day of travel together, it felt significant. The first fragile bridge across the vast divide between their worlds. On the second day of their journey, Sarah awoke to find Nahkohe already alert, his powerful bow in hand as he scanned the surrounding terrain. The weapon was unlike any she had seen before, shorter than English longbows but crafted with obvious care, its surface polished from years of use. In Nahkohe's massive hands, it seemed an extension of himself. Something wrong? She asked, sitting up from her blanket. Nahkohe raised one finger to his lips, then pointed to a ridge about 50 yards away. Sarah squinted but saw nothing unusual among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Cat, he whispered. Big cat. Watching. A mountain lion. Sarah had heard stories of the fearsome predators from settlers at the outpost. Her heart quickened as she carefully folded her blanket, trying not to make sudden movements. What do we do? She whispered back. Nahkohe reached slowly into a pouch and withdrew a small stone, placing it in Sarah's palm. If come, he instructed, miming a throwing motion. Make noise. He then pointed to his bow. I kill. Sarah clutched the stone, knowing it would be virtually useless against a mountain lion, but understanding that noise might startle the creature momentarily. They packed their meager camp in tense silence, Nahkohe positioning himself between Sarah and the ridge. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when Sarah heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet. Nahkohe instantly pushed her behind him, knocking an arrow with fluid precision. The mountain lion appeared on a boulder just 20 yards ahead, its tawny body sleek with muscle, yellow eyes fixed upon them with predatory focus. It was larger than Sarah had imagined, its shoulders rippling as it lowered into a crouch. Don't run, Nahkohe said calmly, though Sarah could feel tension radiating from him. Stand still. The cat's tail flicked once, twice. Then it launched forward in a blur of motion. Sarah couldn't help but gasp as Nahkohe's bow sang, the arrow finding its mark with deadly accuracy. The lion faltered mid-leap but continued its charge. In one fluid motion, Nahkohe dropped his bow and drew a knife from his belt, meeting the wounded animal with a fighter's stance. What followed happened so quickly that Sarah could barely comprehend it. Nahkohe sidestepped the lion's lunge, his knife flashing in the morning sun as he delivered a killing blow to the creature's neck. The mountain lion collapsed, a final growl dying in its throat. Nahkohe stood over it, breathing heavily, blood staining his arm where the cat's claws had grazed him. You're hurt, Sarah said, taking an instinctive step toward him. Nahkohe glanced at his arm dismissively. Small hurt. He knelt beside the dead lion, speaking words in Apache that Sarah understood to be a prayer or offering of thanks to the animal spirit. After a moment of respectful silence, he began the practical task of skinning the cat, his movements efficient and practiced. Sarah watched, both disturbed and fascinated by the process. In Boston, meat appeared on plates with no acknowledgement of the animal it had once been. Here, the reality of survival was unavoidable. Help, Nahkohe said, gesturing her closer. He indicated where she should hold the hide as he worked. Together, they harvested what they could use, the pelt, meat, and sinew. By midday, they had resumed their journey, Nahkohe now wearing the mountain lion's pelt draped across his shoulders. He had also created a small pouch from a piece of the hide, filling it with dried meat. "Eat tonight," he told Sarah, handing her the pouch. Strong meat. That evening, as they made camp near a dry creek bed, Sarah used the last of her cooking supplies to prepare a stew with the lion meat and some wild onions Nahkohe had gathered. The process felt surprisingly normal, almost domestic, after the morning's drama. When she offered him a portion, Nahkohe's eyes widened slightly at the transformed meat. He sniffed it cautiously before taking a bite. "Good," he said after a moment, genuine surprise in his voice. "Different. Good." Sarah felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at his approval. "My mother taught me to cook," she explained, though she knew he wouldn't understand most of her words. Though never with mountain lion. Nahkohe watched her as she spoke, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. For the first time since they'd met, his expression softened into what might have been a smile, brief but unmistakable. As darkness settled around them, Nahkohe suddenly stiffened, his attention drawn to a distant point on the horizon. Sarah followed his gaze and saw it, a pinprick of light flickering briefly before disappearing. "Fire?" she asked. Nahkohe nodded, his expression grave once more. "Apache fire." He made a series of gestures that Sarah interpreted as signals being sent. "Not my people. Different band." He pointed south. "We go west. Away." Sarah looked at him curiously. "Why not go to them? Your people." Nahkohe shook his head firmly. "Not safe. For you." He touched his chest. "For me." With those simple words, Sarah realized that Nahkohe had chosen to protect her even from his own kind, a decision whose full significance she was only beginning to understand. The third day of their journey brought them to the water source Nahkohe had promised. A small spring nestled between rocky outcroppings, its presence betrayed only by the slightly greener vegetation surrounding it. Sarah drank gratefully while Nahkohe refilled their water containers. As they rested in the sparse shade, Sarah removed a handkerchief from her pocket to wipe her face. The delicate fabric, embroidered with her initials in pale blue thread, caught Nahkohe's attention. "What this?" he asked, pointing to the handkerchief without touching it. "A handkerchief," Sarah replied. Then, seeing his confusion, simplified, "Cloth. For cleaning." She demonstrated by dabbing her forehead. Nahkohe nodded, then pointed to the embroidered initials. "Pictures. Letters," Sarah corrected. "S.W. Sarah Whitley. My name." An idea formed in Sarah's mind. Smoothing the handkerchief on a flat stone between them, she pointed to various objects around them. "Water," she said clearly, pointing to the spring. "Water," Nahkohe repeated, his deep voice carefully shaping the English word. Then he offered, "Toh." Sarah attempted the Apache word, stumbling over the pronunciation. Nahkohe's eyes crinkled slightly at her effort. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Again," he encouraged. "Toi." Sarah tried once more, earning a nod of approval. A simple exchange, yet it opened a door between them. For the next hour, they traded words for the elements of their surroundings. Stone, sky, tree, mountain. When they resumed their journey, their pace was punctuated by this new game. Nahkohe would point to something and provide the Apache word. Sarah would respond with English. By mid-afternoon, they had established a rudimentary shared vocabulary. The real breakthrough came that evening as they made camp. Sarah, emboldened by their progress, took a stick and drew a simple map in the dirt, similar to what Nahkohe had done days earlier. But instead of depicting their current journey, she sketched a rough outline of the eastern coast. "Boston," she said, marking a spot. "My home. Before." She drew a line westward. "Long journey. Many months." Nahkohe studied her drawing with evident interest. "Many people?" he asked, making a gesture to indicate a crowd. Sarah nodded. "Yes, a city. Many, many people. Big buildings." She tried to show height with her hands. "Made of stone and wood. Taller than trees." Disbelief flickered across Nahkohe's face. "Taller than trees?" he repeated. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. She hesitated, then opened Thomas's journal. showing Nahkohe a sketch Thomas had made of Boston Harbor. My city. Nahkohe examined the drawing carefully, his expression one of wonder and confusion. He pointed to the ships in the harbor. These float? On big water? Yes, Sarah said. Ships. Very big. She extended her arms to indicate size. Carry many people. Across the ocean. She gestured as if toward a vast distance. Nahkohe sat back, visibly processing this new information. After a moment, he took the stick and smoothed a fresh patch of dirt. His drawing was more skilled than Sarah's, a mountain range with a valley nestled within it. My people, he explained, making marks to indicate dwellings. Not always same place. Follow deer, elk. He made a motion of walking. Summer place, winter place. It was Sarah's turn to be fascinated. You move your homes? With the seasons. Nahkohe nodded. Follow food. Follow water. He pointed to the handkerchief still in Sarah's hand. Your people stay. One place. Yes, Sarah confirmed. Same house. All year. Nahkohe considered this, then pointed to her dress. All women wear this? Heavy cloth. Sarah smiled, recognizing how impractical her clothing must seem. Yes, though this is simple. In Boston, fancier dresses. She tried to mime layers of petticoats and bustles, which elicited the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from Nahkohe. He gestured to his own buckskin clothing. Better for desert. You need. He searched for the English word. Different clothes. I'm beginning to agree, Sarah admitted, plucking at her dust-covered skirt. Their conversation continued as darkness fell, illuminated only by firelight. Sarah found herself explaining concepts she'd never had to articulate before. What a library was, how people in cities bought food rather than hunting it, what a pianoforte sounded like. In turn, Nahkohe described aspects of Apache life. How his people read weather from cloud patterns, the ceremonies that marked changing seasons, how children learned to move silently through forests. There was a moment when Sarah attempted to pronounce a particularly difficult Apache word, mangling it completely. Nahkohe's restraint broke, and he laughed outright. A rich, deep sound that transformed his usually stoic face. Sarah found herself laughing too, the absurdity of their situation suddenly striking her. A Boston merchant's daughter and an Apache warrior, sitting in the desert teaching each other words neither had needed before their paths crossed. As their laughter subsided, a comfortable silence fell between them. Sarah realized with surprise that she no longer felt afraid in Nahkohe's presence. Somehow, in the span of just 3 days, this man from a world utterly different from her own had become familiar. Thank you, she said softly, meeting his eyes across the fire, for helping me, for teaching me. Nahkohe held her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. You teach me too. By the 5th day of their journey, Sarah's strength began to falter. The relentless sun, unfamiliar food, and physical exertion had taken their toll. She woke with her head pounding and her skin unnaturally hot to the touch. Still, she forced herself to pack her blanket and prepare for the day's travel, unwilling to show weakness. We go, Nahkohe said, pointing to a distant ridge. Water beyond. Sarah nodded, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. They had barely walked an hour when the landscape began to waver before her eyes. She stumbled, catching herself against a boulder. Nahkohe was at her side instantly, his usual stoicism replaced by concern. Sarah sick. He pressed a palm to her forehead, frowning at the heat he felt there. I'm fine, she insisted, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. Just need rest. Nahkohe shook his head firmly. Not fine. Fever. He glanced around, assessing their surroundings with practiced efficiency. Need camp. Stay days. The decision made, he led her to a sheltered alcove formed by overhanging rocks. The spot offered protection from both sun and potential observers, clearly a place Nahkohe had used before. Sarah sank to the ground, her legs no longer willing to support her weight. Rest, Nahkohe instructed. I get medicine. Through fever-blurred vision, Sarah watched as he arranged her blanket into a makeshift bed, then set their water skin within easy reach. He hesitated before leaving, concern evident in his dark eyes. "I come back," he promised. "Stay." Sarah nodded weakly, already drifting toward unconsciousness. Her last clear thought was surprise at how worried the stoic warrior seemed about her condition. She woke to the sensation of cool moisture against her face. Opening her eyes, she found Nahkohe kneeling beside her, gently applying a damp cloth to her forehead. Nearby lay a collection of plants, roots, and leaves, some familiar, others strange to her eyes. "Thomas?" she murmured, confusion clouding her fevered mind. Nahkohe shook his head gently. "Nahkohe," he corrected. "Thomas' spirit world. Remember." Reality slowly reasserted itself. "Yes," she whispered. "I remember now. I'm sorry." "No sorry," he replied, helping her sit up enough to drink. The water had been infused with something that tasted bitter but refreshing. Medicine. Help fever. As Sarah drank, she noticed Nahkohe had removed his usual chest covering, working bare-chested in the heat. Intricate scars marked his copper skin, patterns she recognized as deliberate rather than accidental. Signs of some tribal ritual, perhaps. She quickly averted her eyes, remembering the proprieties she'd been raised with, though such concerns seemed increasingly irrelevant in their current circumstances. Throughout that day and the next, Sarah drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. In her lucid moments, she found Nahkohe always nearby, preparing medicines, bringing water, or simply keeping watch. During one such interval, she noticed a small bundle of herbs hanging from the rock above her head. "What is that?" she asked, pointing weakly. "Medicine bundle," Nahkohe explained. "Healing herbs. Old ways." He indicated different plants he had gathered. This for fever, this for strength, this for bad dreams. Sarah studied the careful arrangement. "You know much about healing," Nahkohe nodded. "Grandfather teach. He was medicine man." He searched for the English word. "Healer." "You miss him," Sarah observed, recognizing the softening of Nahkohe's expression when he mentioned his grandfather. "Yes, wise man. Say I have healer hands." Nahkohe looked down at his large palms as if seeing them through his grandfather's eyes. Big like warrior, gentle like healer. It was the most personal information he had shared, offered in a moment of quiet vulnerability. Sarah felt honored by this glimpse into his past. "Your grandfather was right," she said softly. On the third night of her illness, Sarah's fever peaked. She thrashed against the blanket, calling out in her delirium. Sometimes for Thomas, sometimes for her parents, occasionally in terror of unseen threats. Through it all, Nahkohe remained, his steady presence anchoring her to reality. When she finally broke through to consciousness near dawn, she found herself cradled against Nahkohe's chest, his arms supporting her as he helped her drink a medicinal tea. In any other circumstance, such physical proximity to a man not her husband would have been unthinkable. Now it felt simply necessary and somehow right. "Better?" Nahkohe said, relief evident in his voice as he noted her clearer eyes. "Fever breaks." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, newly aware of how much care he had provided. "For everything." Nahkohe nodded solemnly. "Rest more. Today, tomorrow. Then go." As he eased her back onto the blanket, Sarah caught his hand. "Why?" she asked, the question that had lingered since their first meeting. "Why help me?" Nahkohe was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he touched the medicine bundle hanging above them, then placed his hand over his heart. "Grandfather say, all life connected, help when can, even enemy." He met her eyes directly. "You not enemy now." It wasn't a complete answer, but Sarah understood it was sincere. As she drifted back to sleep, still holding Nahkohe's hand, she realized something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer simply survivor and rescuer. Something more complex was taking root, a connection neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed. After 2 days of recovery, Sarah's strength gradually returned. On the morning they were to resume their journey, Nahkohe approached with something wrapped in a piece of hide. "For you," he said, unfolding the wrapping to reveal a small kit containing flint, steel, char cloth, and tinder nestled in a hollowed piece of wood. "Make fire." Sarah accepted the gift with surprise. "You're giving me your fire-starting tools?" Nahkohe shook his head. "Made new. For you." He pointed to the items. "Need learn. For living." Sarah understood the significance. He wasn't simply helping her reach safety. He was teaching her to survive independently in this harsh land. "Show me," she requested, and Nahkohe's expression reflected approval. They spent that morning beside the dying embers of their campfire, Sarah learning the precise movements needed to create a spark, to nurture it with the char cloth, to build it gradually with increasingly larger pieces of tinder. Her fingers were clumsy at first, lacking the lifetime of practice that made the motions fluid for Nahkohe. "Again," he would say each time she failed, his patience unwavering. "Watch hands." By midday, Sarah had successfully created fire from scratch, her triumph evident in the small flame dancing before her. The pride in Nahkohe's nod meant more than she expected. As they finally resumed their journey westward, Sarah noticed Nahkohe's approach had changed. Now, instead of simply leading, he constantly pointed out features of the landscape. "This plant," he would say, indicating a small, unremarkable shrub. "Roots good. Sweet. Dig after rain." Or, "This track. Rabbit. Fresh. Morning." Sarah absorbed everything, realizing he was reading the desert as clearly as she might read a book. By their second day back on the trail, he began testing her. "Water?" he asked, stopping in a seemingly barren area. Sarah scanned their surroundings, recalling his earlier lessons. She noticed birds circling in the distance, remembered his words about wildlife patterns, and pointed in their direction. "There." Nahkohe's eyes crinkled slightly, his version of a smile. "Good. Birds know water." That evening, after they had made camp near the small seep spring she had identified, Nahkohe watched as Sarah arranged the firewood according to his instructions, using the fire kit he had made her. "Why teach me?" she asked as the flames caught. "If we reach the trading post soon?" Nahkohe considered her question, choosing his words carefully from their growing shared vocabulary. "World dangerous. Knowledge keeps alive." He gestured to the vast landscape around them. Not always someone to help. The blunt truth of his statement struck Sarah. In her previous life, she had always existed within a network of support. Family, neighbors, society. Even traveling west with Thomas, they had been part of a wagon train, surrounded by others who could assist in times of need. True independence was something she had never experienced before meeting Nahkohe. "Your turn, teach," Nahkohe said unexpectedly, settling across the fire from her. "Teach what?" Sarah asked, surprised. Nahkohe pointed to Thomas's journal, which she kept carefully wrapped among her few possessions. "Marks on paper. Words that stay." Sarah realized he was asking her to teach him to read. "Writing," she said. "Yes, I can teach you." Using a charred stick from the fire and a smooth stone as a slate, Sarah began with the basics, the letters of her own name. Nahkohe watched intently as she formed each character, his focus absolute. "Sarah," she said, pointing to each letter. "My name in writing." Nahkohe took the charcoal, his large hand dwarfing it, and carefully copied the letters. His precision surprised her. The same steady hand that could send an arrow through a mountain lion's heart now delicately forming the symbols of a language not his own. "Good," she encouraged. "Now yours?" "How would we write Nahkohe?" Together, they sounded out his name, Sarah demonstrating how to translate spoken sounds into written characters. Nahkohe absorbed the lesson with remarkable quickness, soon writing both their names with growing confidence. "Words powerful," he observed, studying the marks. "Stay after voice gone." Sarah nodded, struck by his insight. "Yes, that's why we write. To remember, to speak to people far away or people not yet born." As darkness settled around them, Sarah felt a curious reversal in their relationship. The initial dynamic of rescuer and rescued had evolved into something more balanced. Each with knowledge the other lacked, each willing to teach and learn. The next morning brought their first real disagreement. Studying the terrain ahead, Nahkohe indicated they should follow a canyon that curved northwest. Safer, he explained. Hidden path. Sarah, having gained confidence in reading the landscape, pointed to a more direct westward route across an open plain. Faster, she countered. Save day of travel. Nahkohe frowned. Open. Seen easy. By whom? Sarah questioned. We've seen no one for days. Their debate continued until Sarah finally said, Trust me, as I trusted you. Something shifted in Nahkohe's expression. Surprise, followed by consideration. Finally, he nodded once. Your path. The route proved both faster and easier than the canyon would have been, bringing them to higher ground with a clear view of the territory ahead. That evening, Nahkohe acknowledged her choice with unexpected candor. Good eye, he said. Saw true path. Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his approval, more satisfying than she could have anticipated. She was becoming someone new in this harsh land, someone stronger, more capable, and increasingly at home in a world that would have terrified her just weeks before. The warning came from Nahkohe's raised hand, a sudden halt as they crested a small rise. Sarah froze immediately, having learned to trust his instincts. He crouched low, gesturing for her to do the same. What is it? She whispered. Horses, he replied quietly. White men horses. Now that she was listening for it, Sarah could detect the distant sounds. The jingle of tack, men's voices carried on the breeze. After nearly 2 weeks in the wilderness with only Nahkohe's company, the prospect of encountering other people, her people, triggered unexpectedly mixed emotions. How many? She asked. 3, maybe 4, Nahkohe answered, his expression guarded. Hunters, not soldiers. Sarah considered their options. We could avoid them. Nahkohe nodded agreement, already beginning to move laterally along the ridge to skirt the approaching riders. But fate intervened. A startled jackrabbit burst from cover, drawing the attention of the mounted men below. A shout went up as they were spotted. Stay behind, Nahkohe instructed, his body tensing as the riders changed course, heading directly toward them. Sarah shook her head firmly. No, let me speak to them first. She touched his arm. Please. After a moment's hesitation, Nahkohe nodded, though he remained positioned slightly in front of her, his hand near the knife at his belt. The riders approached cautiously, rifles ready. 3 white men dressed in rough frontier clothing, their faces weathered and suspicious beneath wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a bearded man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, reined his horse to a stop several yards away. Ma'am, he called, his tone a mixture of surprise and wariness. You all right? Sarah stepped forward, conscious of how she must appear. Her once proper dress now torn and trail-worn, her skin tanned by the sun. Yes, I'm quite all right, thank you. The man's gaze shifted to Nahkohe, his expression hardening. This Injun both airing you? We can take care of him. His rifle barrel lifted slightly. No! Sarah moved deliberately to stand beside Nahkohe. He's helping me. He saved my life. Disbelief crossed the men's faces. The second rider, younger than his companions, spat on the ground. Saved you? More like took you, I'd wager. You'd wager wrong, Sarah replied coldly. My husband died at Willow Creek Outpost. My wagon broke crossing a creek. I would have died if Nahkohe hadn't found me. The third man, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward in his saddle. Stockholm, he muttered to his companions. Heard of it before. Captives start thinkin' they're with the savages by choice. I am not a captive, Sarah stated firmly, anger rising in her voice, and you will not use that word in my presence. The leader seemed taken aback by her vehemence. Look, ma'am, we're just trying to help. Settlement's 2 days' ride southwest. We can take you there. Sarah felt Nahkohe tense beside her but maintain his silence. She understood the precarious situation, One wrong move could trigger violence. These men viewed Nahkohe through a lens of prejudice and fear, seeing only an Apache warrior, an enemy. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I've arranged to meet my cousin at Pearson's trading post west of here. Nahkohe is guiding me there." It was a lie, but one that provided a plausible explanation for their companionship and her refusal of assistance. The men exchanged skeptical glances. The leader reached into his saddlebag and withdrew something that made Sarah's breath catch. A torn fragment of a military map. He consulted it briefly. "Trading post is here," he said, pointing to the paper. "But there's a patrol of bluecoats between here and there. 20 men at least, sweeping for hostiles." He gave Nahkohe a pointed look. "They won't take kindly to seeing him with you." Nahkohe remained impassive, though Sarah knew he understood enough English to grasp the threat. "We'll manage," she assured them, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. A tense silence followed before the leader finally shrugged. "Your funeral, ma'am." He reached into his pack again, withdrawing a small package. "Least take some jerky and coffee. Trading post is 4 days' travel, not 2. Sarah accepted the supplies with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Godspeed your journey." The men wheeled their horses, the youngest casting a final suspicious glance at Nahkohe before they rode away. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did Sarah exhale the breath she'd been holding. Nahkohe turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Why?" he asked simply. Sarah understood the question encompassed much more than her refusal of the men's offer. Why had she defended him so fiercely? Why choose to continue their dangerous journey together when offered safe passage? She looked down at the map fragment the leader had inadvertently left, lines drawn across Apache lands, marking military positions, revealing the encroachment of her world upon his. Something had shifted within her these past weeks, a fundamental realignment of her understanding. "Because they're wrong," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "About you. About everything." Nahkohe studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Finally, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the first time he had touched her with such deliberate tenderness. "For days," he said, referring to the trading post. "Hard journey." "I know," Sarah replied, "but we'll make it. Together." As they continued westward, both were acutely aware that something profound had changed in their relationship. The encounter had forced a choice, and Sarah had chosen Nahkohe over the world she had come from. A decision that would shape everything that followed. The day after their encounter with the hunters, Nahkohe veered from their westward path, leading them toward a series of dramatic red rock formations that rose like sentinels from the desert floor. Sarah followed without question, having learned to trust his navigation. "Special place," he explained when she finally asked their destination. "Sacred." By midday, they reached the base of the formations. Nahkohe paused, his expression solemn as he gazed upward. He removed a small pouch from his medicine bag and took out a pinch of what looked like cornmeal, offering it to the 4 directions with whispered words in Apache. Sarah watched respectfully, understanding she was witnessing a ritual of deep significance. When Nahkohe finished, he turned to her with unusual hesitation. "Come," he said softly. "Show you." They climbed a narrow path that wound between massive stone pillars. The air felt different here, cooler, stiller, as if the very atmosphere acknowledged the sanctity of the place. Rounding a final bend, they emerged onto a protected plateau where a small spring bubbled from the rock face, feeding a clear pool surrounded by surprisingly lush vegetation. "Oh," Sarah breathed, taking in the unexpected beauty. Ancient pictographs covered the rock wall above the spring, stylized figures of animals, people, and symbols she couldn't decipher. "Many generations," Nahkohe explained, gesturing to the images. "Grandfathers of grandfathers made first marks." Sarah approached the wall with reverence, recognizing she was being shown something few outsiders had ever seen. "What do they mean?" Nahkohe pointed to different sections. "Stories, great hunt, long drought, spirit journey." He indicated a spiral symbol. "Life path." Without thinking, Sarah reached toward the ancient markings, then hesitated, hand suspended in midair. "May I? Sacred," Nahkohe reminded her. "Look, not touch." Sarah nodded, lowering her hand. Instead, she noticed Nahkohe watching her closely, as if her reaction to this place held special importance to him. "Why show me?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'm not Apache." Nahkohe was silent for a moment, seemingly searching for the right words. "You see true," he finally said. "Not like others." Understanding dawned that he was paying her a profound compliment, acknowledging that she had moved beyond the prejudices of her culture to see him and his people as they truly were. Sarah looked down at her dust-covered shoes, suddenly aware they might be inappropriate in such a sacred space. She slipped them off, placing them respectfully aside. Nahkohe's expression softened at the gesture. "Good," he approved. "Earth feels feet." They sat side by side at the edge of the pool, the afternoon sun casting dappled light through the foliage above. From a small pouch at his waist, Nahkohe withdrew something that caught the light. An eagle feather, its shaft decorated with tiny beads and sinew wrappings. "From First Vision Quest," he explained. 16 summers. He held it with obvious reverence. "Eagle spirit, strength, far sight." He began speaking in Apache, his deep voice taking on a rhythmic quality that made Sarah realize he was recounting a story. Though she couldn't understand the words, the cadence carried her along. At certain points, he would pause to translate key elements into their shared vocabulary. "Young man, alone, mountain." His gestures depicted a solitary figure on high ground. "For days, no food, only water, waiting for spirit." He touched his chest, then his forehead. "Eagle comes, not here." He indicated his eyes. "Here." He touched his heart. "Message, protect those with good hearts, even from different tribes." The significance wasn't lost on Sarah. Nahkohe was sharing not just any story, but one that explained his decision to help her. A personal revelation that must have cost him considerable cultural taboo to voice. Moved by his trust, Sarah felt compelled to reciprocate. She began singing softly, a hymn her mother had taught her as a child. The melody echoed gently off the stone walls, her clear voice blending with the sounds of the spring. When she finished, Nahkohe looked at her with a new appreciation. "Song medicine too," he observed. "Different. Same." "Yes," Sarah agreed, understanding exactly what he meant. Different traditions, same human need to connect with something larger than themselves. They remained at the spring as afternoons stretched toward evening, sharing fragments of their respective spiritual traditions without judgment or attempt at conversion. Simply as two people offering glimpses into the frameworks that shaped their understanding of the world. As the sun began to set, bathing the red rocks in fiery light, they sat in companionable silence watching the changing colors. Without planning or thought, their hands rested side by side on the stone between them. When Nahkohe's little finger brushed against hers, neither pulled away. It was a small touch, barely a connection at all. Yet in that sacred space it felt momentous. Sarah's heart quickened, not with fear but with a new awareness of Nahkohe not just as her protector or companion, but as a man. The realization should have troubled her. Instead, as darkness gathered and the first stars appeared above the ancient sanctuary, she felt a sense of rightness, as if the paths of their separate lives had been destined to converge in this place, at this time. "Thank you," she said softly as they finally rose to descend before nightfall. "For sharing this with me." Nahkohe nodded, his usual reserve softened by the intimacy of what they had shared. "Now you carry," he replied, "in heart." In the days following their visit to the sacred spring, a subtle shift occurred between Sarah and Nahkohe. Their conversations flowed more easily, their silences more comfortable. Yet beneath this growing harmony ran an undercurrent of awareness that neither acknowledged directly. Sarah found herself noticing things about Nahkohe she hadn't allowed herself to see before. The grace with which his powerful frame moved through the landscape, the rare occasions when humor softened his stoic expression, the gentleness of his hands when tending their evening fire. For his part, Nahkohe seemed increasingly attuned to her comfort, finding the smoothest paths, identifying the shadiest rest spots, adjusting their pace without being asked when he sensed her fatigue. Once, when she stumbled on loose rocks, his hand was instantly at her elbow, steadying her, and lingering a moment longer than necessary. 3 days from the trading post, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. As darkness fell, Sarah found herself studying Thomas's journal by firelight. The familiar handwriting brought a wave of memory, but no longer the sharp pain of recent grief. Instead, she felt a gentle melancholy, as if Thomas now belonged to another chapter of her life, one completed rather than abruptly torn away. Across the fire, Nahkohe worked with his knife and a small piece of wood, his focus absolute. Sarah watched his large hands move with surprising delicacy, carving with practiced precision. "What are you making?" she asked after a time. Nahkohe glanced up briefly, then returned to his work. "Soon done." The non-answer piqued her curiosity, but Sarah didn't press. Their shared language had expanded considerably over the weeks of travel, yet some things remained difficult to express across the cultural divide. As the fire burned low, dark clouds gathered overhead, obscuring the stars. The first heavy drops of rain fell just as they finished securing their meager shelter. A small overhang augmented by a lean-to Nahkohe had constructed from branches and Sarah's blanket. The sudden downpour was fierce but brief, leaving behind the clean, earthy scent of wet desert soil. Sarah sat at the edge of their shelter, watching rainwater cascade from the rocks above, forming temporary waterfalls that gleamed silver in the moonlight now breaking through the clouds. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Yes," Nahkohe agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking not at the landscape but at her. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken awareness. Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dim light that concealed it. Her heart beat faster as Nahkohe moved to sit beside her, closer than usual but still maintaining a respectful distance. "For you," he said, extending his hand to reveal what he had been carving. A small wooden bird, its wings extended as if in flight, details meticulously rendered despite the simple material. Sarah accepted the gift with wonder, turning it to admire the craftsmanship. "It's exquisite." "Thank you." "Sparrow," Nahkohe explained, "small but strong, survives where others cannot." His eyes held hers. "Like you." The compliment touched her deeply. "I wouldn't have survived without you." Nahkohe shook his head slightly. "Strong spirit before me, stronger now." A comfortable silence fell between them as Sarah continued to examine the carving, running her fingers over its smooth surface. She didn't recognize the gesture as a traditional Apache courtship gift, but she sensed its significance nonetheless. "I never thought," she began, then paused, uncertain how to express the complex evolution of her feelings. "Thought what?" Nahkohe prompted gently. Sarah looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they sat, how different this man was from anyone she had ever known, and how that difference no longer mattered as it once had. "I never thought I could feel at home in this wilderness," she said finally. "Or that I could." The words trailed off, but something in her expression must have conveyed what remained unspoken. Nahkohe's gaze intensified, his usual reserve giving way to open longing that both thrilled and frightened her. A sudden gust of cold wind made Sarah shiver. Without hesitation, Nahkohe placed his arm around her shoulders, a protective gesture, yet one that crossed a boundary they had carefully maintained until now. "Cold," he said simply, offering an excuse they both recognized as permission. Sarah allowed herself to lean slightly against his warmth. "Yes." They remained that way as night deepened around them, neither willing to break the fragile new connection. Sarah thought of Thomas, of the life she had expected to live, of all the conventions and expectations she had been raised to honor. Yet here, in this harsh land so far from Boston's propriety, those constraints seemed increasingly irrelevant. When Nahkohe finally spoke again, his deep voice was soft near her ear. "Tomorrow trading post, White People Place." The reminder of their approaching destination hung between them. The trading post represented a crossroads, a return to the world of settlement and civilization, where an Apache warrior and a white widow would have no acceptable place together. Yes, Sarah acknowledged, her voice barely audible. What then? He asked, the question encompassing far more than their next direction of travel. Sarah turned to face him fully, finding herself mere inches from his gaze. I don't know, she admitted, but I'm not ready for our journey to end. Something flickered in Nahkohe's expression. Hope, perhaps, or relief. His hand moved to gently touch her hair, a gesture of such tenderness that Sarah felt tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes. Not end, he assured her. New path. As the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the desert landscape, Sarah realized with sudden clarity that her heart had already chosen its direction. One she could never have anticipated when she first encountered the imposing warrior who had become so much more than her rescuer. They were less than a day from the trading post when Nahkohe suddenly froze mid-stride, his head lifting like a deer sensing danger. Sarah had learned to trust these moments of alertness and immediately stilled beside him. What is it? She whispered. Apache, he replied, his voice low and tense. My band. The revelation sent a ripple of apprehension through Sarah. In all their weeks together, they had deliberately avoided other Apache groups, with Nahkohe choosing paths that kept them isolated. Now, it seemed that careful avoidance had failed. How many? 5, maybe 6, he answered, scanning the landscape with practiced eyes. Warriors. Hunting party. Sarah followed his gaze but saw nothing in the seemingly empty terrain. Should we hide? Nahkohe considered this, then shook his head grimly. Too late. They see us. He pointed to a distant ridge where Sarah finally discerned movement, riders materializing like apparitions against the sky. Will they attack? Fear edged her voice, though not for herself. Not attack, but not welcome. Nahkohe's expression had hardened into something she hadn't seen since their earliest days together. A warrior's mask, devoid of the warmth she had come to cherish. The Apache riders approached rapidly, spreading out in a formation that Sarah recognized as strategic, surrounding them without appearing openly hostile. Their leader, a lean man with a scar across his chin and eagle feathers tied in his hair, reined his horse to a stop several yards away. Nahkohe, he called, his tone conveying neither greeting nor threat, merely acknowledgement. Kitchi, Nahkohe responded in kind. What followed was a rapid exchange in Apache that Sarah couldn't follow, though the tension in Nahkohe's posture told her everything she needed to know. This was not a friendly reunion. Occasionally, Kitchi's gaze would flick toward her, his expression shifting from dismissive to contemptuous. The conversation grew increasingly heated. Though Nahkohe maintained his composure, Sarah could sense his anger in the set of his shoulders, the slight forward tilt of his stance. The other warriors remained silent, watching with impassive faces. Finally, Kitchi made a sharp gesture that needed no translation, dismissal. From his horse, he withdrew something and flung it to the ground at Nahkohe's feet. Sarah recognized it as a message arrow, its shaft marked with symbols, its point directed deliberately toward them. With a final barked command, Kitchi wheeled his horse, the other warriors following as they rode away. Only when they had disappeared behind the ridge did Nahkohe's rigid posture relax slightly. What happened? Sarah asked, moving to his side. What did he say? Nahkohe's expression was grim as he picked up the arrow. Warning. From Chief. He ran his finger along the markings on the shaft. Say I betray tribe. Help enemy. His eyes met hers. Say I not welcome return. The full impact of his words struck Sarah with sickening clarity. Nahkohe had been banished, cast out from his people for helping her. Because of me? She whispered, guilt washing over her. You've lost your home, your tribe. My choice, Nahkohe said firmly. Known when first help you. But why? Sarah asked, desperate to understand the sacrifice he had made. Why risk everything for a stranger? For a white woman? Nahkohe was silent for a long moment, the warning arrow still in his hand. When he finally spoke, his voice held a depth of emotion she had rarely heard from him. Kitchi, others see world one way. Apache here. He drew a line in the dirt. White people there. Enemy always. He looked up at her. My grandfather teach different. Say world changing. Must find new path or all die. He tossed the arrow aside. Kitchi me rivals many years. He want warpath. I want. He searched for the right word. Life path. Sarah understood then that the seeds of Nahkohe's separation from his tribe had been planted long before he found her. That his decision to help her had been part of a larger philosophy. A different vision for the future than that held by warriors like Kitchi. What did he say about me? She asked, sensing there was more. A flicker of anger crossed Nahkohe's face. Not good words. Say you bewitch me. He made a gesture near his head. Spirit sickness. Make me forget who I am. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Sarah couldn't help but feel a flash of indignation. Bewitched you? As if you couldn't make your own choices. The corner of Nahkohe's mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Told him white woman too stubborn for spirit magic. The unexpected humor broke the tension momentarily, but reality quickly reasserted itself. What happens now? Sarah asked, gesturing toward the trading post they couldn't yet see but knew lay ahead. You can't go back to your people. Trading post first, Nahkohe decided. Then, he hesitated, uncertainty unusual in his typically decisive manner. Your path after. Your choice. Sarah heard the unspoken question beneath his words. When they reached the trading post, she would once again be among her own kind, able to rejoin the white world if she chose. Nahkohe was offering her freedom without obligation, despite the fact that he now had nowhere to return to. The realization clarified something that had been forming in her heart for weeks. She reached for his hand, an intimacy she wouldn't have dared before but now seemed essential. Our path, she corrected softly. Our choice. Nahkohe's fingers tightened around hers, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that needed no translation across their cultural divide. The warning arrow lay forgotten in the dust as they continued westward, facing an uncertain future but facing it together. The distant notes of a bugle cut through the dawn air, jerking Sarah from sleep. Beside her, Nahkohe was already on his feet, his body tense with alertness. Soldiers, he said, the single word carrying a weight of danger. Coming this way. They had camped in a shallow canyon, planning to reach the trading post by midday. Now, the sound of the military bugle, hauntingly familiar to Sarah from settlements she had passed on the journey west, represented a mortal threat to Nahkohe. How many? She asked, hastily gathering their few possessions. Nahkohe listened intently. Small group, maybe 10. His expression darkened. Scouts. Looking. The hunter's warning about increased cavalry patrols returned to Sarah's mind. The torn map fragment they'd acquired had shown military positions, but those could have changed in the days since. We need to hide, she urged. The trading post is still hours away. Nahkohe nodded grimly, scanning their surroundings with practiced efficiency. There, he decided, pointing to a network of rock formations with potential cave openings. Deep canyon. Many places to hide. They moved swiftly, abandoning their camp with minimal trace. The bugle sounded again, closer now, accompanied by the distant drumming of hooves. Sarah's heart pounded as they scrambled up a steep path toward the rock formations, all too aware of how exposed they were on the open slope. Reaching the first cluster of boulders, they pressed into the shadows, Nahkohe's body shielding Sarah as a cavalry patrol appeared in the canyon below. 6 blue-coated soldiers rode in formation, rifles at the ready, while 2 Apache scouts led the way, a bitter reminder of the complex alliances in this contested territory. Army scouts, Nahkohe whispered, a note of contempt in his voice. Sell own people for army money. The patrol paused directly below their position, the commander consulting a map while the scouts examined the ground. Sarah held her breath, pressing closer to Nahkohe as his arm tightened protectively around her. They find camp, he murmured. We'll follow. Without waiting for the inevitable discovery, Nahkohe led Sarah deeper into the maze of rocks, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive as a warrior. They ducked through narrow, passages, climbed over tumbled boulders, and finally reached a series of cave-like openings cut into the cliff face. Inside, Nahkohe directed, guiding her into the largest opening. Go deep. The cave extended farther than Sarah had expected, its interior cool and dim after the bright morning sun. They moved carefully through the narrowing passage until they reached a larger chamber, dimly lit by sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Wait here, Nahkohe instructed. I watch and trance. Be careful, Sarah urged, reluctant to let him go but understanding the necessity. She waited in tense silence, straining to hear any sound of pursuit. Minutes stretched interminably until a sudden commotion echoed from the cave entrance. Shouts, the crack of a rifle, then an ominous rumble. Sarah rushed toward the sound, heart in her throat, only to find the passage partially blocked by fallen rock. Through the gap, she could see Nahkohe on the other side, dust covering his shoulders and blood streaming from a gash on his arm. What happened? She called, reaching through the opening. Soldiers find cave, he explained tersely, squeezing through the narrow gap to join her. Shot at rocks. Make cave mouth fall. The collapse had been fortunate in one sense. It now shielded them from immediate pursuit. But it also threatened to trap them inside the cave system. Are you badly hurt? Sarah asked, examining the wound on Nahkohe's arm. He shook his head, though she could see the pain in his eyes. Not deep. Keep moving. Must find other way out. They continued deeper into the cave network, their path illuminated by shafts of light from fissures above. The passages twisted and branched, some too narrow to navigate, others leading to dead ends. Nahkohe's strength began to flag as blood loss and exertion took their toll. Rest, Sarah insisted when he stumbled against a wall. Let me tend your wound. For once, he didn't argue. Sarah tore a strip from her petticoat to bind his arm, working quickly by the dim light. The wound was deeper than he had admitted, the bleeding worryingly steady. Need medicine plants, she said, recalling what he had taught her. But we have nothing here. Water help, Nahkohe replied, gesturing ahead. Here dripping. Sarah listened and caught the faint sound he had detected, water trickling somewhere in the darkness. I'll find it, she promised. Stay here. Following the sound, she discovered a small pool where water seeped through the cave ceiling. She soaked her handkerchief, returning to bathe Nahkohe's wound and help him drink. His normally impassive face now showed signs of pain and exhaustion, concerning Sarah deeply. We'll rest, she decided. The soldiers can't follow through the collapsed passage. Nahkohe shook his head weakly. Scout no caves. Find other entrance. As if confirming his warning, distant voices echoed through the passages. Soldiers exploring the cave system from another entry point. Their time was running out. We need to move, Nahkohe insisted, struggling to rise. Sarah supported him, their roles now reversed as she became the protector. They continued through the labyrinthine passages until they reached a chamber with 3 potential exits. Which way? Sarah asked, desperate for guidance. Nahkohe's normally acute senses were dulled by pain and blood loss. Not sure, he admitted. Need scout. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the scrape of boots on stone. Making a split-second decision, Sarah helped Nahkohe into a shadowed alcove. Stay hidden, she whispered. I'll lead them away. Before he could protest, she slipped into one of the passages, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. Her heart hammered as she heard a shout behind her. There! Movement ahead! Followed by the sound of pursuit. Sarah ran blindly through the twisting corridor, praying she was leading the soldiers away from Nahkohe, while somehow finding a way out for herself. The passage narrowed, then widened again, finally opening onto a ledge high above the canyon floor. She had found an exit, but also trapped herself with nowhere to go as a cavalry scout emerged from the cave behind her. The cavalry scout advanced slowly, rifle raised. Ma'am? Are you hurt? Sarah stood at the edge of the precipice, mind racing. The young soldier before her, barely more than a boy with a wispy attempt at a mustache, clearly hadn't expected to find a white woman in these caves. "Oh, thank heavens!" she exclaimed, summoning every bit of her Boston upbringing to play the distressed lady. "I've been lost for days." Confusion crossed the scout's face as he lowered his weapon slightly. "Alone, ma'am? How did you come to be here?" "My husband and I were traveling to the trading post when our wagon broke down," Sarah improvised, her voice deliberately shaky. "Indians attacked us. My husband, they killed him." She forced tears to her eyes. "I've been hiding, trying to find my way." The scout's posture relaxed, suspicion giving way to sympathy. "You're safe now, ma'am. The patrol is just below. Let me escort you." "I think I saw them," Sarah interrupted. "Through that passage." She pointed to a different tunnel than the one leading to Nahkohe. "I was too frightened to call out." There were several Indians, moving deeper into the caves. The scout's attention immediately shifted. "How many? Which direction exactly?" "4, maybe 5, Sarah replied, her expression earnest. "They went that way carrying weapons. Not more than 10 minutes ago." The young man's face hardened with purpose. "Stay here, ma'am. I'll signal the others." He moved to the tunnel entrance, giving a series of short whistles that echoed through the caves. Within moments, 2 more soldiers appeared. A hurried conference followed, with Sarah maintaining her performance of traumatized survivor. The patrol leader decided to pursue the supposed Apache band, leaving the young scout to escort Sarah safely down to their horses. "We'll come back for you, Jenkins," the sergeant instructed. "Get the lady to safety first." As the soldiers disappeared into the tunnel, Sarah allowed the scout to help her navigate the steep path down to the canyon floor. Once there, she stumbled deliberately, clutching her ankle. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I think I've twisted it." "The horses? Are they far?" "Just around that bend, ma'am," Jenkins replied, looking torn between helping her and maintaining his post. "Please," Sarah implored. "I can make it if you just bring one horse here. I'm afraid to walk further on this ankle." The young scout hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Stay right here, ma'am. I'll be back in 2 minutes." The moment he disappeared around the bend, Sarah scrambled back up the path, finding a different route into the cave system. Her heart pounded as she navigated the dim passages, praying she could find Nahkohe before the soldiers realized her. Deception. She located him exactly where she had left him, slumped against the wall with his eyes closed. For a terrifying moment, she feared he had lost consciousness, but his eyes opened at her approach. "Sarah," he murmured, relief evident in his voice. "Thought soldiers take you. I led them away," she explained quickly, helping him to his feet. "But we don't have much time. I found another way out." Supporting his weight against her shoulder, Sarah guided Nahkohe through the passages she had discovered. His normally fluid movements were now labored, his breathing ragged. The wound on his arm had soaked through the makeshift bandage, and she suspected he had hit his head during the cave-in as well. They emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall, concealed from below by an outcropping of rock. In the distance, Sarah could hear the soldiers regrouping, their voices carrying confusion and frustration as they realized they'd been deceived. "We need to move quickly," she urged. "Can you make it down the slope?" Nahkohe nodded grimly, though his pallor concerned her. They descended carefully, using the rock formations for cover. By the time they reached the canyon floor, Nahkohe was leaning heavily against her, his normally inexhaustible strength fading rapidly. "Need safe place," Sarah murmured, scanning their surroundings. "Somewhere to rest and treat your wounds." Remembering the landscape they had traversed the previous day, she oriented herself and began leading them toward a dense thicket of mesquite she had noticed. Not ideal, but offering concealment until nightfall. The going was painfully slow. Twice they froze at the sound of horses, pressing into shadows until the danger passed. By the time they reached the thicket, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly. Nahkohe collapsed as soon as they found a sheltered hollow within the tangled branches. Sarah immediately set to work, her hands steady despite her fear. She cleaned his arm wound as best she could with their limited water, then tightened the bandage to slow the bleeding. A purplish bruise had formed at his temple where falling rock had struck him. "Rest," she instructed, echoing words he had so often said to her. "I'll find water and plants for medicine." Nahkohe's eyes, usually so alert, struggled to focus on her face. "Dangerous," he protested weakly. "Soldiers. I learned from the best," Sarah assured him with more confidence than she felt. "I'll be careful." Leaving him concealed in the thicket, Sarah ventured out with their water skin and Nahkohe's small knife. The weeks in his company had transformed her. The proper Boston lady now moved through the wilderness with deliberate steps, eyes constantly scanning, ears attuned to the slightest sound of threat. She located a seep spring similar to ones Nahkohe had shown her, filling their water container and refreshing herself. More challenging was finding medicinal plants, but her careful observation during her illness now proved invaluable. She recognized the yarrow that would help stop bleeding, the prickly pear pads that could soothe inflammation, and wild mint to help with fever. Returning to their hiding place, Sarah found Nahkohe sleeping fitfully, his skin hot to the touch. She worked methodically, preparing poultices as he had taught her, combining her own knowledge of nursing with the wilderness medicine he had demonstrated. As she tended him, Sarah hummed softly, the same hymn she had sung at the sacred spring, the melody both calming her nerves and seeming to ease Nahkohe's restless sleep. When his eyes finally opened, clearer than before, she felt a surge of relief. "You take care," he observed, a note of surprise in his weakened voice. "Like medicine woman." "I had a good teacher," Sarah replied, helping him drink the mint tea she had prepared. "How do you feel?" "Head hurts. Arm better." His gaze held hers with unexpected intensity. "You saved me." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "As you saved me," she reminded him. As evening approached, Sarah kept watch at the edge of their shelter, planning their next move. The trading post lay less than half a day's journey ahead, but Nahkohe needed rest before attempting it. More concerning were the cavalry patrols surely still searching the area, now likely hunting for both an Apache warrior and a deceptive white woman. "We are hunted," Nahkohe said when she returned to his side, his perception acute despite his weakened state. "Both now?" "Yes," Sarah acknowledged, the full weight of her choice settling upon her. In choosing Nahkohe, she had effectively placed herself outside the protection of her own society. "Both now." Night fell with unusual swiftness, clouds obscuring the moon and stars. The temperature dropped rapidly, the desert surrendering its daytime heat to the vast, dark sky. Sarah added branches to their small, concealed fire, grateful for the flickering warmth but anxious about the light it cast. Nahkohe sat propped against a fallen log, his condition improved but still far from his usual strength. The medicine Sarah had prepared seemed to be working. His fever had broken, and the wound on his arm had stopped bleeding. "Cold night," he observed, watching as Sarah rubbed her hands near the flames. "Yes," she agreed, her breath visible in the chill air. "Colder than usual." Nahkohe gestured to the space beside him. "Sit. Share warmth." The invitation was practical given the circumstances, yet Sarah hesitated momentarily, aware of the increasing intimacy between them. In the weeks they had traveled together, they had maintained careful physical boundaries except when necessity dictated otherwise. Now, those boundaries seemed increasingly arbitrary. She settled beside him, and Nahkohe unfolded a star-patterned blanket they had traded for days earlier, draping it across both their shoulders. The simple wool covering, decorated with traditional Apache designs, somehow represented their shared journey, neither fully of one world or the other. "Better?" he asked as their shoulders touched. "Much," Sarah admitted, allowing herself to lean slightly against his solid warmth. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds and the occasional distant whinny of cavalry horses, still too close for comfort. The danger surrounding them had stripped away pretenses, creating a strange pocket of honesty in the wilderness. "Nahkohe," Sarah began hesitantly, "if we reach the trading post tomorrow." "When?" he corrected gently. "When reach trading post." She smiled at his certainty. When we reach it, what happens then? The question encompassed far more than their physical destination, and Nahkohe seemed to understand its full weight. He was silent for a long moment before responding. Trading post safe for you, he said carefully. White people place. You could stay. Find way to settlement. The practical answer wasn't what Sarah had been seeking. And you? Nahkohe's expression remained impassive, but his voice softened. Not safe place for me. Not now. Soldiers looking. So we would separate, Sarah stated, the words leaving a hollow feeling in her chest. Could, Nahkohe acknowledged. If you want safe life. The fire crackled between them as Sarah considered his response. The logical course would indeed be for her to reintegrate into white society, to find passage to California or perhaps back east. Yet the very thought filled her with a sense of loss so profound it felt physical. I don't know what I want anymore, she confessed, her voice barely audible above the night sounds. When Thomas died, I thought I would continue his dream. California, a new start. She touched her locket unconsciously. But now, Nahkohe waited patiently as she struggled to articulate the transformation she had undergone during their weeks together. Now the thought of returning to that life, corsets and calling cards and proper society, seems impossible, she continued. I'm not the same woman who left Boston, or even the widow who buried her husband at Willow Creek. She turned to face him, suddenly needing to see his expression. I've changed, because of this land, because of you. Something shifted in Nahkohe's stoic features, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips usually held in a firm line. His hand moved to cover hers beneath the blanket. I changed too, he admitted, the simple statement carrying profound meaning from a man of such few words. The confession hung between them, neither able to look away from the other. Sarah was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hand on hers, the way the firelight played across the strong planes of his face. I never expected to feel this way again, she whispered, her heart racing. After Thomas, I thought that part of my life was over. And to feel it for someone so different from anyone I've ever known. Nahkohe's expression softened further. Different outside, he said, touching his chest, then hers. Same here. The simple truth of his observation struck Sarah deeply. Despite the vast gulf between their backgrounds, their core values had proven remarkably aligned: courage, loyalty, respect for the sacred, and a willingness to see beyond society's boundaries. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, of what I feel, of what it means. I fear too, Nahkohe confessed, surprising her. My people say white woman steal Apache warrior's soul. Your people say. He paused, searching for the right words. Say Indian man, white woman, not allowed. Forbidden, Sarah supplied softly. By both our worlds. Nahkohe nodded solemnly. Two paths. Hard choice. The fire popped suddenly, sending sparks upward into the night. Sarah watched them fade into the darkness. Each tiny light extinguished too quickly. Life could be equally brief, she realized. Thomas's certainly had been. With that thought came a clarity that had been building for weeks. She turned to Nahkohe, her decision made. What if we make a new path? She asked. Together. She leaned forward slightly, her intent clear but still giving him the choice to pull away. Nahkohe remained still for a heartbeat, his dark eyes searching hers. Then he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers with unexpected gentleness. The kiss was hesitant at first, both navigating unfamiliar territory, but it deepened as Sarah's hand moved to his shoulder and his arm encircled her waist. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, something fundamental had changed between them, a boundary crossed that could never be restored. New path, Nahkohe agreed softly, his forehead resting against hers. Not easy, but together. As the night grew colder around them, they remained beneath the star blanket, talking in low voices about possibilities neither had dared consider before. A future neither Apache nor white, but something uniquely their own. At Pearson's trading post appeared on the horizon like a mirage. a cluster of low adobe buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade, smoke rising from several chimneys. After nearly 3 weeks in the wilderness, the sight of a human settlement struck Sarah as both welcoming and strangely foreign. "Stay hidden," she instructed Nahkohe as they observed from a concealed position among the rocks. "Let me approach first, make sure it's safe." Nahkohe nodded, still moving gingerly from his injuries. "Careful. Soldiers, maybe." Sarah had tied her hair back neatly and brushed the worst dust from her dress, attempting to make herself presentable. Still, she knew she must look a far cry from the proper Boston lady she had once been. "I'll return by midday," she promised. "If not," she didn't finish the thought. "I find you," Nahkohe assured her, his hand briefly touching hers. "Always." The half-mile walk to the trading post gave Sarah time to compose her story. As she approached the gates, a mongrel dog announced her arrival with enthusiastic barking. The heavy wooden door swung open to reveal a bearded white man with a shotgun held casually at his side. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. "Yes, please," Sarah replied, summoning her most respectable manner. "I'm Sarah Whitley. My husband and I were traveling to California when our wagon was damaged. I've been making my way here for weeks." The man's eyebrows rose. "Alone? Through Apache country?" Before Sarah could respond, a woman appeared behind him, middle-aged with dark hair streaked with silver, her features suggesting Navajo heritage. "Joseph, let her in before you interrogate her," the woman chided, moving past him to offer Sarah a hand. "Come, you look exhausted. I'm Marie Pearson." Inside the palisade, Sarah found a busy trading operation. The main building served as both store and residence, while several smaller structures housed workshops and storage. A few customers, a mixture of settlers, hunters, and what appeared to be peaceful Native Americans from various tribes, browsed the merchandise or conducted business with Joseph Pearson. Marie led Sarah to a back room where a kettle steamed on a cast-iron stove. "Sit," she instructed, pouring a cup of strong coffee. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" The simple kindness nearly undid Sarah's composure. "It's been a while," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. While Sarah sipped the coffee, a luxury she hadn't tasted in weeks, Marie prepared a plate of beans, dried beef, and cornbread. The familiar food seemed almost overwhelming after her diet of wilderness provisions. "Now," Marie said, sitting across from her, "the truth, if you please. No woman crosses Apache territory alone and lives to tell about it." Sarah hesitated, studying the older woman carefully. There was something in Marie's direct gaze that inspired trust, yet caution was still warranted. "I wasn't entirely alone," she acknowledged. "I had a guide." Marie nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "Apache?" Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because Marie smiled slightly. "I was Navajo before I married Joseph. I recognized the moccasin tracks that sometimes walk beside white women's boots." This revelation changed everything. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "His name is Nahkohe. He saved my life after my husband died and my wagon broke down. He's been guiding me to safety, but now he's injured, and there are cavalry patrols hunting him." "And you care for him," Marie observed, her tone making it a statement rather than a question. Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Yes." Marie was silent for a moment, then nodded once. "Wait here." She returned shortly with Joseph, who listened with a furrowed brow as Marie explained the situation in rapid, hushed tones. His expression shifted from skepticism to resignation. "Where is he now?" he asked Sarah directly. "Hidden in the rocks east of here," Sarah replied. "He needs medical attention." Joseph exchanged a look with his wife. "Marie, take the cart. I'll mind the store." He turned to Sarah. "If any soldiers come by, you're my wife's cousin from St. Louis, traveling to join your husband in Tucson." "Understood." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank you, both of you." As Joseph returned to the trading floor, Marie gathered medical supplies and food. "Help me with the cart," she instructed. Outside, as they harnessed a mule to a small wagon, Sarah noticed Marie's wedding ring, a simple silver band engraved with both Western and Navajo symbols. "You and Joseph," she began hesitantly. "Married 23 years, Marie confirmed, adjusting the harness. "Not always easy. Both our peoples had opinions." She glanced at Sarah. "Still do." They drove the cart to where Nahkohe remained hidden. His initial wariness gave way to cautious acceptance when Sarah explained who Marie was. The older woman examined his wounds with practiced hands, speaking to him in a mixture of Navajo and Apache words that seemed to bridge their linguistic differences. By late afternoon, they had Nahkohe settled in a small back room of the trading post, his wounds properly dressed with real bandages and medicine. Joseph had posted a young Paiute boy as lookout for any approaching cavalry. That evening, as Sarah helped Marie prepare dinner, she noticed a large ledger book on Joseph's desk. The trading post's records documented transactions with settlers, various tribal members, and passing travelers. Flipping through it idly, Sarah was startled to discover entries for several couples identified as mixed marriage or MB in Joseph's shorthand. Marie noticed her interest. "This territory exists between worlds," she explained. "Some find that space comfortable, not fully one thing or another." Sarah's finger traced an entry for T. Williams and S. Williams, MB settler/Hopi, who had purchased supplies for a homestead northwest of the trading post. "There are others?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. "Like you and Joseph?" Marie nodded, her expression softening. "More than most would believe. Living quietly, finding their own way." She returned to chopping vegetables. Not an easy path, but possible. That night, as Sarah sat beside Nahkohe's bed, sharing the day's discoveries, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. A sense of possibility, of a future that might actually be within reach. "A place between," Nahkohe murmured thoughtfully when she described the ledger entries. "Not Apache, not white, something new." "Something new," Sarah agreed, taking his hand in hers. "Something ours." Their third morning at Pearson's trading post dawned with commotion. Sarah woke to urgent voices and the sound of running feet. Joseph appeared at the door of their small room, his expression grave. "Cavalry unit approaching from the south," he announced. "Full patrol, not just scouts. 30 men at least." Nahkohe, whose strength had been returning under Marie's care, was immediately alert. "How long?" "Less than an hour," Joseph replied. "They'll stop here. Always do." Sarah and Nahkohe exchanged a worried glance. His wounds were healing, but he was far from his full strength. If discovered, he would have no chance against so many soldiers. "Is there somewhere we can hide?" Sarah asked. Joseph shook his head. "They search the buildings when they come through. Looking for contraband, they say, but really making sure we're not harboring Apache." Marie appeared behind her husband, her face set in determined lines. "The root cellar might work for a few hours, but not for a thorough search." She looked directly at Nahkohe. "You need to be gone before they arrive." "I'll go with him," Sarah said without hesitation. Joseph raised his hand. "Wait, there's more news. One of our Paiute traders came in at dawn. Says there's a band of Apache warriors moving through the North Pass, led by a warrior named Kitchi, apparently hunting for someone." Nahkohe's expression darkened at the name. "Kitchi not stop. Blood oath now." The implications settled heavily in the room. They were caught between two approaching forces, cavalry from the south, hostile Apache from the north, with the trading post soon to become the center of this dangerous convergence. "We need to leave," Sarah stated firmly. "Now." "Where will you go?" Marie asked. Caught between blue coats and Apache blood feud? It was the question they had been avoiding since arriving at the trading post. Their temporary sanctuary had allowed them to heal and rest, but not to resolve the fundamental challenge of their situation. Joseph cleared his throat. "I might have an option." He spread a well-worn map across the table. "Here in the Mogollon Highlands, settlement called 3 Rivers. Mixed place, white prospectors, peaceful Apache bands, some Mexican families. No real law except what they make themselves. He traced a route with his finger. 3 weeks' journey. Rough country, but if you can make it. He let the sentence hang unfinished. 3 weeks, Nahkohe repeated, studying the map. Mountains good. Many places to hide. Marie placed a small pouch on the table. Seeds for when you arrive. Corn, beans, squash. Good land there for growing. The kindness of these relative strangers, themselves a couple who had crossed cultural boundaries, moved Sarah deeply. She reached for Marie's hand. Thank you. For everything. While Joseph helped Nahkohe gather supplies and select a horse from his small corral, Sarah changed into the clothing Marie had altered for her. Sturdy canvas trousers under a split riding skirt, a man's cotton shirt modified to fit her frame, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. The practical outfit represented her final break from the Boston lady she had once been. As she packed their provisions, Sarah's fingers brushed against her wedding ring. The simple gold band Thomas had placed on her finger with such hope for their future together. She had continued wearing it out of both habit and respect for his memory. Now she carefully removed it, holding it in her palm for a long moment. He would want you to be happy, Marie said softly, observing from the doorway. Yes, Sarah agreed, surprised to find the truth in those words. He would. She wrapped the ring in a small piece of cloth, tucking it safely into her bag. Not discarded, but no longer defining her present. Outside, the trading post bustled with hasty preparations. Joseph was creating a diversion, sending several workers out with his wagon train as if departing for regular deliveries, providing cover for Sarah and Nahkohe's escape. Northeast Trail, Joseph instructed, pointing to a barely visible path leading into the foothills. Follow it until you reach the old mission ruins, then head due north. The map shows the way from there. Nahkohe, mounted on a sturdy paint horse, extended his hand to Sarah. Their eyes met in silent understanding of the magnitude of their choice. This was no temporary arrangement, no simple journey to safety. They were choosing a new life together, leaving behind everything familiar to forge a path neither had imagined before their paths crossed. Sarah took his hand without hesitation, allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. The weight of her locket, containing Thomas's picture, pressed against her chest, a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers from both the natural world and those who would oppose their union. Yet as her arms encircled Nahkohe's waist, Sarah felt a certainty that had eluded her since Thomas's death. Ready? Nahkohe asked, his deep voice carrying a note of tenderness reserved only for her. Ready, she confirmed, tightening her hold on him. As they rode away from the trading post, Sarah caught a final glimpse of Joseph and Marie standing together in the doorway, a couple who had made their own impossible choice years before and forged a life between worlds. Their example offered both hope and a practical model for the challenges ahead. The sound of a distant bugle floated on the wind, the approaching cavalry unit still miles away but advancing steadily. In the opposite direction, dust clouds suggested movement that might be Kitchi's war party. Between these two threats, Sarah and Nahkohe rode swiftly toward the mountains rising on the horizon, their shared future waiting to be written. No going back now, Sarah murmured against Nahkohe's shoulder. He reached back with one hand to cover hers where it rested against his chest. Forward path, he agreed. Our path. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in strokes of amber and gold. Sarah and Nahkohe had traveled through most of the night, pushing their horse hard to put distance between themselves and the converging threats behind them. Now, as they paused at the edge of a swift-flowing river, both rider and mount needed rest. Must cross, Nahkohe said, surveying the churning water with practiced eyes. Cavalry dogs lose scent in water. Sarah nodded, studying the current. The river wasn't extremely wide, but its waters ran fast and deep, a formidable barrier, especially to someone who had never learned to swim properly. Sensing her apprehension, Nahkohe turned to face her. I teach, Apache way. He dismounted and helped her down, then led the exhausted horse to a grassy spot where it could rest. Returning to Sarah's side, he began removing his moccasins. Remove boots, he instructed. Feel water first, not fight. Sarah hesitated only briefly before following his example. The cool morning air raised goosebumps on her skin as she removed her boots and rolled up her trouser legs. Together, they waded into the shallows at the river's edge. Water like life, Nahkohe explained, his hand steadying her arm as the current tugged at her legs. Fight against, drown. Move with, survive. He demonstrated the Apache swimming technique, a fluid, economical movement that worked with the current rather than against it. Sarah watched carefully, then attempted to mimic his motions. Her first efforts were clumsy, drawing a rare smile from Nahkohe. Good start, he encouraged. Try again. They practiced in the shallows until Sarah felt more confident. The morning sun rose higher, warming the air and drying their damp clothing between attempts. Finally, Nahkohe deemed her ready. Now cross, he said. I stay close. With their few possessions secured on the horse's back and raised as high as possible, Nahkohe led the animal into the water. Sarah followed, her heart pounding as she felt the river bottom slope away beneath her feet. The moment came when she had to trust her newly learned skills, letting her feet leave the riverbed as the current caught her. For a terrifying moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her as the water closed over her head. Then Nahkohe's voice reached her, "Move with, not against," and she remembered the technique. Her arms and legs found the rhythm he had taught her, and suddenly she was swimming, moving diagonally across the current rather than fighting it directly. Nahkohe stayed near, one hand on the horse's bridle, the other ready to assist Sarah if needed. But she managed on her own, her confidence growing with each stroke. When they finally reached the opposite bank, Sarah emerged dripping but triumphant, a new skill mastered out of necessity. "I did it!" she exclaimed, the simple achievement feeling momentous. Nahkohe's eyes crinkled with pride. Strong woman, learn fast. As they rested on the far bank, allowing themselves and their possessions to dry in the strengthening sun, Sarah gazed back at the river they had crossed. It seemed symbolic somehow, a boundary between their past lives and whatever awaited them ahead. "No one follow easy now," Nahkohe observed, scanning the horizon behind them. The landscape was clear, no dust clouds or movement betraying pursuit. Safe for now. By midday, they resumed their journey, the mountains growing larger before them. The terrain gradually changed, desert giving way to foothills dotted with juniper and pinyon. The air grew cooler and sweeter as they climbed, filled with the scent of pine and sage. Late afternoon brought them to a vista point where the land spread out before them, miles of forested highlands stretching toward distant peaks. Somewhere in that wilderness lay 3 rivers, the settlement Joseph had described, and their hoped-for sanctuary. "Beautiful," Sarah breathed, taking in the panoramic view. "Good land," Nahkohe agreed. "Many places to live free." As they prepared to continue, Sarah's hand brushed against her locket, the silver oval containing Thomas's daguerreotype that she had carried since his death. She unclasped it from around her neck, holding it in her palm for a long moment. "What is past stays in heart," Nahkohe said softly, understanding her unspoken thoughts. "Not need carry in hands." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had carried Thomas's memory faithfully, but that chapter of her life was complete. With a deep breath, she placed the locket on a sun-warmed stone overlooking the valley. "Goodbye, Thomas," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing me west. I found a different dream than the one we shared, but I think you would understand." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they followed a game trail deeper into the mountains. Sarah rode behind Nahkohe, her arms encircling his waist, her cheek resting against his back. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and Nahkohe's solid presence lulled her into a peaceful state despite their uncertain future. That evening, they made camp in a protected hollow beneath towering pines. As Nahkohe built a small fire, Sarah unpacked the supplies Marie had given them, including a unique gift she hadn't noticed before. Wrapped in soft deerskin was a circular frame woven with sinew and decorated with both eagle feathers and delicate lace. A dream catcher that incorporated elements from both their cultures. "Look," she said, showing it to Nahkohe. "Marie must have made this for us." He examined the mixed-culture dreamcatcher with appreciation. "Good medicine. 2 worlds together." Sarah hung it from a nearby branch where the night breeze could stir the feathers and lace. As darkness settled around them, she and Nahkohe sat side by side before the fire, planning their approach to 3 rivers and the life they hoped to build there. "What will we do?" she asked. "When we arrive?" Nahkohe considered this. "Build lodge first, then plant Marie's seeds." His hand found hers in the firelight. "Make new life, not Apache way only, not white way only. Our way. Our way," Sarah echoed, leaning against his shoulder. Above them, stars emerged in the clear mountain sky, the same stars that had shone over Sarah's Boston childhood, over Nahkohe's Apache homeland, and now over this new shared path they had chosen together. As different as their beginnings had been, they had found common ground in courage, respect, and a love that transcended the boundaries both their peoples had established. The journey ahead would not be easy. They would face prejudice, hardship, and the constant challenge of bridging 2 worlds. But as Sarah looked up at Nahkohe's face in the firelight, she felt a certainty that had eluded her since Thomas's death. They would face whatever came together, creating something new from the best of both their traditions. "I love you," she said simply, speaking the words aloud for the first time. Nahkohe's hand tightened around hers. "Agasti," he responded, teaching her the Apache word for love. Together now, always. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, Sarah and Nahkohe remained side by side, their shadows merging into one against the ancient pines. 2 people from worlds apart who had found, against all odds, a shared destiny beneath the vast Arizona sky.